Ever wonder what goes into the making of one of these podcast episodes? Probably not, but you're going to find out anyway. This is Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 1.
Crazy to think that this is our 50th episode, dude.
Yeah, how about that? I actually sat down and counted them on the screen because I always forget that we actually replayed an episode early on because we were still having trouble scheduling stuff. And this is officially the 50th recorded episode, the 50th new episode that we've published. And they said it couldn't be done. Or no, wait, they said we don't care.
So for this opening episode of season 6, we're going to talk about all the challenges and fun and mechanizations, if that's a word. If it isn't, I just made it up, that go into making this podcast. Really been a boon for Tom and I's relationship and friendship.
Yeah.
And hopefully a boon for, 2 or 3 of you out there that listen on a regular basis. Otherwise, it's also been full of challenges because this isn't our full-time job or even close. We don't make a penny off of it. And both of us have full-time jobs. So trying to find time to schedule and all that other stuff has been, fun and
Yes, although
frustrating at times.
I was going to say definitely a challenge for both of us. When I sat down and tried to come up with some topics to discuss, and we called this one "Making the Sausage." The idea being that nobody really wants to hear how this is done, but maybe, I don't know. I think it's a little interesting. We decided to do this just kind of to catch up and to talk about the stuff that we love to talk about, and it kind of forced us into a regular conversation. And as we went along, though, we realized that it would be fun to interview people and bring other people into it and talk to them about stuff, mainly about the kind of 80s and 90s when we were young, youthful, and energetic. But it has definitely been one of the more, well, it is the most fun thing I've done in the last year or so. It is surprising, though, how much work goes into something like this, which frankly is only an hour of listening every week. And the first question that people usually ask me, if they ask any questions at all, is, how long does it take to make the episode? And I would say that scheduling the episode probably takes more time than everything else, going back and forth, trying to figure out a day, trying to figure out how, when we can get together, whether we have a conflict. That seems to take quite a bit of time. There's a lot of texting back and forth to get that done. I think you have a little bit more difficulty getting scheduled than I do by virtue of your job, by virtue of the fact that you have a boss, which I don't. So it makes it a little easier for me to get the time. But also, I think you're generally more beholden to a specific schedule, lots of meetings, that kind of thing. I schedule my own appointments. I can definitely move things around, even court appearances and things that are required by a judge. I still have a big hand in scheduling my own stuff, so that part is a lot easier for me. But finding the time and the day where we're both available can still be kind of difficult.
Don't disagree at all, and credit to you for being flexible with all this stuff, because there's times where, like, literally at the last minute, it's like, I'm out, I can't do it, sorry.
Right.
And we make it work. And I think the funny thing is, to me at least, because I listen to a handful of podcasts on a regular basis, including one that I watch on video, and it's 3 guys, and they're really funny. I mean, they do good stuff. But then they have 3 producers like on site with them, like, who are, we don't have anybody else. It's just the 2 of us. And
we barely have each other.
yeah. So all this stuff has been learned, everything from researching what tools we should use, from what we're doing right now. We opted to go with Zoom so that we can see each other, and it has a pretty, high enough quality recording capability. We looked at website tools, what we would use to build out our website, and neither of us are, well, I work on the tech side. I'm no programmer. I did a website back in college, but So it was important to find something that was easy to use, flexible enough to do what we wanted to do. And then Tom did a lot of research into the recording and editing tools, and I'll let you take it over from there because you are our editor. You spend hours of time that I don't, listening to us, which must be painful. Taking out all the ums and the ahs and the me not finishing sentences and stuff like that. I think you do a great job.
Yeah, it's funny because it turns out I really enjoy that part. And I had no idea that I had any kind of affinity for sound editing at all. Although when it comes to things like writing, I actually think I'm a better editor than I am a writer. So I suppose it makes a little bit of sense, but I didn't have, and probably now barely have the, editing skills. So it did take a long time. And I think from the beginning, one of the cool things is we had a pretty good division of labor, and we really did come up with it on the fly. It turned out that I ended up with a lot of the sound editing part of it, pretty much all of that. On the other hand, you did almost all of the website creation, development, design, and for the most part, all the updating and everything else. And we didn't go in knowing we were going to do that, or at least I sure as hell didn't. And I don't think if you'd asked me before we started a podcast, which one of those things I would have been better at, I probably would have said the stuff that you're doing, but I don't think I would have done as good a job with the website as you're doing. And I don't think you have the patience or frankly, the time to do the editing stuff, because I don't mind sitting and listening even to my own voice, but certainly not to the combination of things. And I kind of get a kick out of figuring out where to put in the sound effects that we use and finding the sound effects that we use. And I would never have guessed that part of it would have been enjoyable to me, but it actually is kind of fun. I don't like to do it if I only have, a day before the episode, but that's one thing we've managed to get better at as we've gone along is we tend to record this stuff at least a week and sometimes 2 or 3 weeks in advance of when it drops, which gives me more time to listen again and figure out where to cut stuff or add stuff for that matter.
And when I listen to the final output, and I think in general, we try to be fairly raw in our recordings, not taking out everything.
Correct.
But there are plenty of times where I'll be like dreading like a part coming up because I remember how much I screwed it up, and you'll have cleaned it up really nicely and taken out sometimes sentences and then made them fit together nicely. I don't know that I have the ear for that stuff. So that one is definitely one I think you have excelled at and continue to get better at. And I'm amazed sometimes at your ear for how to make this stuff sound better.
Yeah, and like I said, I've gotten better and better as we've gone along. We were talking about scheduling and the difficulties with scheduling. Our finale episode for last season, we had scheduled that to record probably 3 weeks before we actually expected it to air, and it just kind of fell apart because of the holidays, primarily, I think, but also your work schedule and your family schedule and other stuff. So we ended up at the last minute, 2 days before we were going to drop the final episode, we decided that you just couldn't make it, and out of the blue asked my wife, Dawn, to be a guest, which I'd always intended to do, but not at the last minute like that. And after we recorded it, we were driving up, I think, to Chicago or something, and we listened to it. I wanted her to listen to it in case she wanted me to cut something out. But I had edited quite a bit of it already, and she was so happy I took out something where she remembered stammering through something and saying the opposite of what she meant and then correcting herself. And I took out the first part, and you couldn't tell, or at least I felt like you couldn't tell. And she looked at me as we were driving up, and she went, "Oh, thank you. I felt so stupid." And I was like, "Yeah, I am getting a little bit good at this anyway."
I mean, that is true. There are times where like we just messed around with the cold open. Finishing sentences sometimes is not as easy as it should be when you're on recording. And so, yeah, I appreciate you not allowing me to sound like a total moron all the time.
Well, I mean, of course, I'm very careful for myself as well. So it's to our mutual benefit. But that division of labor was completely organic. I can't even remember, other than you just saying, "I'll take care of the website." I mean, we didn't talk about who would be better at what or whether it would work one way or the other. It just kind of happened, which is funny because if you look at, we have a fairly I don't want to say rigid, but we have a pretty specific schedule for our episodes now. There are segments we like to do and that we want to do. And all of that came kind of from the first season, feeling around a little bit, but just starting to talk about stuff. And then after episodes, you would text and say, we should do this, or maybe, well, let's try that. Or, when we talk about episode topics, I tend to write stuff down right away and throw them up on our shared document. And then we'll be in a conversation and you'll say, I saw that, but what if we did it this way and kind of focus it in a different direction or narrow it down as opposed to something general that I said. And again, that just comes out of conversation. I mean, obviously you're thinking about it and I'm trying to think about it, but I think it's kind of cool that we're able to do that without a whole lot of hassle.
And I think that highlights the informal nature of this, which I think we both embrace. I mean, I can imagine that those conversations for professional podcasts happen around a table or, a planning or production meeting, and we just don't have the luxury of doing that. So it's either text or quick phone calls or, one of us will be out walking the dog and then be like, hey, I had an idea. And call and we'll chat and it's like, well, I got to go. So just run with that. And we've had ideas that haven't flourished. I thought there'd be value to doing some sort of quiz or, weekly competition, and we just haven't figured out a way to make that happen. I want to do a show on Canada.
No, that's still happening, dude. That is definitely, it may be after I move to Canada, but we're definitely doing an episode about Canada. That's coming soon.
But there's certainly other segments that, I know we'll come up with ideas we haven't thought of yet. But I like how this has evolved. I think we even got a compliment from one of our guests about the pacing and the format of our show. And that meant a lot because I know we don't have a lot of listeners and we probably never will, but this is still fun.
Yeah. And that guest, by the way, wasn't related to me at all. So, I mean, it was a legitimate compliment. But we do have, thank goodness for at least a few solid regular listeners, because some of the stuff we've done, especially guests that we've interviewed, those ideas have come from people who do listen to the podcast, and we try to incorporate that stuff. And I think if we have a strength as hosts of a podcast, one of the billion hosts out there, is that we're not, what's the word I'm thinking of? It doesn't have to be our way or the highway. It doesn't, we don't have a vested interest in a specific idea. As I said, there have been a number of times, I think, where I've had an idea and you've had a better idea that might have used my thoughts as a kernel, but it turned out to be a completely different approach. And I feel the same way when people make suggestions about who we should try to interview or what things we should talk about. I think that helps too. And I think that helps us be able to kind of react and go with the flow when schedules get torn up or thrown away.
Yeah, I think lack of an ego is a good thing for both of us. Because I said I've come up with some ideas and you're like, yeah, and you always do a nice job of being like, yeah, it's a dumbass idea, Chris. But speaking of our guests, I do want to point out that we get positive and negative feedback because we did get cursed out recently by one of our favorite guests and listeners. So
yes,
kind of proud of that.
I do like to get a message that just is a string of expletives, and we got one of those recently, so I like that. That was good. Although we also appreciate more constructive criticism, but that particular listener has been very good about those kind of things as well, making suggestions and helping us with ideas so that we can keep doing this, because it does. At a certain point, we may run out of ideas. But I got to say, right now, if you look at our outline as it goes into the future, I mean, for good or for bad, I think we have a whole season 6 in front of us, and probably most of a season 7 just in terms of ideas. And those things will change, I'm sure, or the way we do them may change as we go about. But I think we're in pretty good shape as far as that goes.
Okay, I have a really important question. I'm going to type a word into the text here, and you tell me how you pronounce it, and then I'll explain why I'm asking.
All right. I would pronounce that mantra.
Me too. All right.
Cool.
So Google said mantra.
Really?
Um,
Fuck Google.
I also say mantra. The reason I ask that question is we not only get ideas, but we get mantras like be nice to your friend Chris
Yes.
or Tom. And actually, that, as silly as it sounded when it first was said, I repeat it on a fairly regular basis because I do tend to be fairly self-deprecating, self-effacing, which I think can be a strength, but if you take it too far, it becomes a weakness. So thank you, Liz, for reminding me to be nice to myself.
One of the things that I think that I am getting better at, and that I think you need to be more involved in, is when we have guests, being involved in the interview process. I've had at least one person tell me after listening to one of our guest episodes say, Chris wasn't really very involved in that. And I said, yeah, that bastard. I keep telling him that he should just chime in, because even if it's awkward, I can usually edit out the awkwardness of try to. I think part of it is you don't want to interrupt the conversation, and I get it because I have that feeling too sometimes. But I'm hopeful that as we get more guests, that we may kind of alternate in terms of who takes the lead. I feel like I've taken the lead more in that, and again, maybe that's just an organic thing, and there may be a comfort level there too. But that's one of the things that I threw up on the outline, because I think, I mean, if you look at our analytics, the episodes we have with guests get more listeners. And, although this still and always will be really more an opportunity for us to shoot the breeze than to like turn into some giant, podcast. We would like more people to hear it. And I guess the best way to put it is it's fun to have somebody on and talk to them about stuff, even if it's somebody we already know, to give them a chance to talk about what they do or what they're interested in that way. And I really enjoyed doing it. And I think your New Year's resolution ought to be to maybe be a little bit more involved in that part of the process.
Okay, I'll try.
Thank you. All right.
And you're right.
So,
And having guests on is a nice change of pace because, I'm going to be honest, talking to you all the time gets boring, dude.
oh shit! Tell me about it. Jesus. All right, so I'm going to treat it like an interview a little bit. Do you have? Are there some guests, some people that you are thinking about or want to try to get on on for an episode that we could talk to and learn stuff from?
Yeah, I think we've said this before, and his schedule's way more strenuous than mine. But my boss is a awesome guy to work for, and he's an expert in science, and especially for advising for science fiction shows. So I've actually gone to a presentation he did at one of it wasn't Comic-Con, but it was like that. And it was cool to see this room full of sci-fi geeks getting all geeked out by my boss, who's a renowned scientist, biologist. They would like throw out the most obscure reference to some show and he would know it. And so he'd be in fantastic interview and one of the nicest people I've ever met. So I'm sure if he can find time to do it, he will. And then there's a couple artists, musical artists that we tend to focus on the not overly popular, especially me. And I have an email of one artist, I guess I won't say here, and I should just email him and ask because, we're not popular. We're not going to help anyone raise their profile, so to speak. But I'm really curious about what it's like to be an artist and go up on a stage when you may not have a full room. Like I think I've talked about the Corey Brannon the concert, and there couldn't have been 10 people in the room. And the dude is traveling all over the country, and I love him. I think he's a fantastic artist, and his show is great. And it's like, how do you perform with all that energy when there's no one there? And again, that's not the only thing I'm interested in, but what drives you to keep? What's the creativity process that drives you? It's like, and I think that's in a very, very, very small, tiny comparison. We do that. No one listen. Not many people listen but we continue to create. And I was thinking about that. I mean, technically we're creators, man. That's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, no, and I would the closest we've come to that kind of thing so far is we've interviewed a couple musicians, and I think we both had questions, and I don't think those two interviews were similar at all to each other. I think both people were very different, of course, and the questions we asked them were not necessarily the same, but they were working musicians, not necessarily full-time musicians. Again, usually a side gig. But I found that really interesting to talk to James Beck, for example, from Eastern PA, and John Condren is a musician here in the Joliet area, and I really enjoyed that. And we've got a couple of those types of interviews on the horizon. We're going to meet and talk to another friend of mine who's a musician in this area, and I love the idea of getting a hold of somebody who's a little bit more national. Even if they played a small rooms. I think it would be really interesting to talk to somebody who goes from place to place to place and doesn't go home at the end of the night. Because the guys we've talked to so far tend to, they may tour a little bit, but they'll go out for a week, and that would be max. Most of them have to go to the gig, to their job the next day. So I hope we can interview some people like that, and we've talked to some writers. I really get a kick out of that because I'm really interested in their process. And we have a couple, at least one more writer that we'll be meeting with this season, and I'm looking forward to that a lot. But that's another area where hopefully listeners can make some suggestions. We met James Beck because of our friend Rick, who does listen to the podcast, and he's a musician out there and knows a million people out in the Reading, Berks County area in Pennsylvania. And he actually has already suggested a couple other people to me and sent me some of their music. So I'm hoping we can talk to them as well.
All right, so let me flip it. You played interviewer. Let me do the same. One thing that I think you've especially improved on is, well, two things: finding stingers, the little funny clips at the end. One, do you have a favorite, or do you have a process for finding those? And then secondly, are some of it's out of necessity because we change tools. How do you go find all these sound effects and stuff? And I don't even know I know there's sound effects out there, but what have you done to find all those and put those into our show on a regular basis?
Yeah, I know I swore at Google not too long ago, but I do have to give Google credit because that's all I did. And I'm actually trying to look on my favorites here because hopefully I saved the damn thing. There are just a couple sites that are basically it's like freesounds.com or .org or something along those lines. And it's just a question of, there are sites out there where you can where they just put up recordings of crowd noise, for example. The most difficult thing I've had to search for was when we did our awards episodes. When we did the Eggy episode, I wanted to find an applause clip, and I wanted to find a booing and applause, a crowd booing clip. And I found a site that had literally thousands of those. Like, people just go and they record that kind of stuff, and then they just put it up online. And I'm not sure why they do it, but I'm glad they do it because it was a great resource. But then you can look around in there and find one that's long enough or loud enough or kind of fits what's in your head. But I was surprised really that it didn't take longer than it did once you find the site, and I really should give them credit. And for the life of me, I don't think I put a little star on it when I got there, because I'm looking right now.
That was actually the sound effect I was thinking of, because I heard a version of that where we had a different applause sound.
Yeah.
And then or I forget which one it was, and then you messaged and said, I found a better one. And I agree. And it's not a huge difference, but it definitely does make a difference as far as the overall quality of the show.
And then as I was doing that, I also figured out that in the software that I use, the tools that I use to edit, it's called Reaper. And we've talked a little bit about that on the show because we had to make a transition because what Spotify provided was going away, and I got all freaked out because I had learned how to use that stuff. And Reaper's turned out to work out really well, even though it's not really set up for podcasting as much as I think for musical, recording. But what you can do is you can overlap clips so that one runs into the other, which is great when you have like a musical sting, in the middle, like our introductory music or the stuff that comes out. But it really worked well with the applause and the booing because you could kind of overlap them, so it didn't sound like applause cut, pause, and then you'd hear us start. Nobody thought we we had a crowd of 1,000 people listening to us doing the Eggies, but it made it sound smoother when you went through. And I figured that out just kind of on the fly as I was trying to edit. I was like, oh, if I overlap them a little bit, you can still hear the beginning of, for example, what you said after the applause, but it made it sound smoother. And that's all just trial and error, of course. And it turns out I think I have a decent ear for it. I mean, the people get paid to do it would do a much better job than me, but for what we're trying to do here, I thought it worked out pretty well. So that's generally how I could find the sound effects. And my absolute favorite part of editing is trying to find something funny to put at the end of a podcast episode. And luckily for us, we screw so much up while we're talking, particularly at the beginning and the end. The beginning, because we can't figure out how to get started, I think, and the end, because we get tired. There's almost always something where we say something funny. It's usually swearing because, we're very juvenile, and those are the things that I find funny. But I will admit that now when we record, I kind of keep my ear out, hoping there's something that's kind of silly or stupid that would be a good stinger. Usually I find something that we can't use elsewhere. Every once in a while, and it's only happened once or twice, but every once in a while we'll say something so funny I think it needs to be in the episode, and then I just copy it and put it at the end because I think it's worth it. You did, and I wish I could remember the specific example, but you said something that I just thought was fucking hilarious, and it was perfect in context as in the flow of what we were talking about, but it also sounded really funny when that's all that you heard right at the very end of it.
Yeah, I was gonna do a fake stinger. I just ended up not having the time. I was gonna record myself like coming onto a Zoom call and being like, "Okay, I'm ready to record. Let's get the season finale going. Where you at, Tom?" Like, because
Right.
I missed the
Just like
last
empty
episode.
hallway. Hey,
Yeah,
hello. Actually, I think we have only planned one stinger.
yeah.
And it is one of my favorites, but it came completely, and again, it was one of those organic conversations where you and I were talking, and I truthfully don't remember who said it first. But we kind of worked it out in a conversation off mic, and then it's the only one. It's one of the only stingers where I've used audio that wasn't you or me, and it was Andy Armstrong who was a guest, and he had sent an audio clip we ended up using as the intro to the Aggies, and then one of your awards was him singing "I Am Woman," and it just occurred to us that how funny it would be just to get him like singing in the shower or singing by himself. So that's the only one we planned. And he gave me like a 2-minute clip that I think I shaved down to just about 10 or 20 seconds. But it is one of my favorites. And it's the only one that you could call even close to scripted, even though he improvised it all. But the idea was something we came up ahead of time.
Yeah, and the idea was more just thinking of him as in my head. I still have this. He used the words chubby little kid
Right.
singing at the top of his lungs, "I am woman," and I always said, "Is can you record that for us?" And he went with the shower scene, and he had a whole lot more stuff that was really funny. It just
It
was a
was
little
all
too
really
long.
funny. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I felt like I really wanted that clip where you just kind of hear him and then it goes away. And I thought it worked out really well. I did talk to him just the other day. I actually had dinner with him and Liz, his wife, who's probably our number one fan. And he was okay with the editing that I did. I was worried he might be upset that I took out because he had some other stuff he said, but he seemed to be pretty happy with it.
so we do have regular segments. We probably should move on to those. But before that, one other fairly important change that we had to make on the fly. Our early episodes had the songs that we recommended for the playlist and for other parts. And
Yeah.
that's because we were recording on Spotify and they allowed us to use those songs without getting the rights because we were recording on Spotify. And then we discovered that we would have to change platforms. And that whole process is one beyond our means to probably
Right.
communicate to artists or their representatives and or to pay for them. So we made what I thought was a really difficult decision. I was worried it was going to ruin the show. And I think in the end, it's been a benefit to us to not have those songs because not everyone gets as geeked out about listening to the entirety, an entire song that we recommended, especially
Right.
some of the more obscure stuff. So it's made us sort of think about how we would orally or visually represent, what we are describing or what we're recommending versus just saying it and then playing the song. And I think that's helped us.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I've had one listener say that they liked when we played clips from the song. But most, again, in terms of feedback, most people don't really have an opinion one way or the other, but I do think it helped us kind of make it a smoother process, particularly because the way Spotify did it, I couldn't edit the clip that we provided anyway. It was a specific length, and it wasn't necessarily the lyrics we wanted to highlight or anything like that. So it was very cool to do it. I think it sounded fine, but it also added some time to the podcast that we had no control over. And they actually got rid of that even before we got rid of we had to change what tools we were using because I think it was an experiment for Spotify as well. In some ways, it's harder to recommend music when you can't play it for someone to hear. But on the other hand, like I said, if that would only have been worthwhile if we had a little bit more control over what part of the song that we were playing and how much of it we would play. So, and that's, I think, a good example of just how organically we have been able to adjust stuff and try to make it smoother. In that case, we didn't have a choice, but it also, I can remember you helping me try to figure out what tools to use to edit when we had to get rid of it. And then I can remember us just kind of talking out in general terms, all right, what are we going to do if we're not going to play the clip? And I think that's worked out. And one of the things that we've tried to do as we've gone along is I think we recognize we needed to get the length of the episode below an hour in general. And we've had lots of conversations about how many segments to do or what way to do it. And I've gotten an inkling that maybe we don't want to add any segments, any like set segments. We may want to get rid of some, but we certainly don't want to add anything.
So, in the spirit of staying under an hour, why don't we move on to our first segment, regular segment? And this is a relatively new one. It's called Unknown Unknowns. So, Tom and I both tend to listen to Tom listens to some overly popular, but we try to listen to not, or at least recommend on this show, some not overly obvious choices of either movies or songs or artists or whatever. And we decided that we would try to focus on especially unknown artists. And it's my turn this week to start off season 6. And I went with a band that I feel like they're right on the border of, they're definitely not appreciated. And if you look at pure numbers, they're relatively unknown, but they seem like they've been right on the cusp of breaking out for years. And the band is Haha Tonka. And I know I've recommended some of their stuff before.
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage folks to go out and listen to any of their albums and just, grab a couple songs. And I'm willing to bet that at least one of them sticks with you for the rest of that day because they have some of the catchiest and well-written songs, and they just can't seem to fully break through. So they've had, I think, 6 albums. They're from West Plains, Missouri. They are named after Haha Tonka State Park. The current album is Blood Red Moon. And this has sort of been a pattern with me. I listened to their first album. Let me get the exact title and the release year. Their first album was released in 2009. So a good 15, 16 years ago. Or sorry, 2007. The one that really stuck with me was Novel Sounds of the Nouveau South, which I think is a cool title. The opening track is entitled Pendergast Machine. And the Pendergasts were a political machine, I think in Chicago, maybe. I'd have to, that'll probably
Yeah,
be
I'm
a
not
post
sure.
facto. But they have that. They have a song called Klozev Revolve to Your Bleeding Heart, where they reference Dostoevsky in the song. And the closing track is Thoreau in the Woods. So very literary, very historic, but all very catchy songs. And it's the same thing. All these I've listen to these albums, I'd be like, yeah, it's a pretty good album. And then as I listen to it more and more, it grows on me. And it's the exact same thing with the latest one, Blood Red Moon, where there's a song called Somehow It Gets Away From You, which is about losing love, getting older, all these things of just life somehow gets away from you. It's a very, very good song. And I thought it was really the only one that was going to hold on to me from that album. And then I saw Carry It Around show up as or actually showed up just on one of my recommended playlists, and I listened to it, and it same thing. And
Yeah.
they just have a way of writing really catchy, really well written stuff that I think is way more underappreciated than it should be. I was going to do a quick look up. One of their songs made it as I think the opening for a TV series that didn't last, and I thought that maybe that would be what propelled them into some more fame, but it just hasn't. They have 282 followers on YouTube Music, around 15,000 listens a month on Spotify, which doesn't sound like it's a little, but if you look at some of the more popular artists, that's not a huge number. So let's boost those numbers for Ha Ha Tonka. Really good band out of Missouri. I think they're actually in Chicago. They were on Bloodshot for a little while, but I think Bloodshot's no more. So
I had not heard of them before you put them on a playlist. And then I think they were on Bloodshot after that. And I agree with you. I think that's a great kind of definitely unknown. And I didn't realize that Blood Red Moon was such a recent album. I was wondering if they had faded out a little bit, but that came out in 2023, so they're still out there doing stuff.
they're usually a couple. I mean, they were every 2 years for a little while, and then they went almost 6 years. I was afraid they were done too. But there's a song from Heart Shaped Mountain called Everything. It's got a fantastic backbeat with the drums. Check out that music video. It
Oh
just
yeah.
makes it just makes you happy. They're like rafting down a river and all this stuff, and it's a cool video. It's a fun
Hmm.
video.
All right. Cool. The next thing we're going to talk about is our specific recommendation for the episode. Last season, we started or decided to make recommendations from a specific decade. One song, or I should say, one recommendation per episode per year. For this season debut recommendation, we're going to go with the year 1991. I will give you my first recommendation. It's not a song. It is a film uh, directed and written by Spike Lee called Jungle Fever. I'm a big Spike Lee fan, although I do think his work is a little uneven. I would say that he's done more great work than poor work. Jungle Fever is just an interesting look at interracial relationships. It's Wesley Snipes, and I've completely forgotten the actress's name, who at the time I was in love with. Annabella Sciorra, that's what it was. I didn't have to look
Yeah.
it up. I just had to close my eyes and see her face from 1991. Anyway, really cool movie, really interesting Spike Lee approach to things, and that's my recommendation from 1991 is Jungle Fever, directed by Spike Lee.
Great choice. I remember when that came out. I feel like you saw it at the theaters.
Yeah, I
Um,
did.
as you said, he does usually more great stuff than not, and that's definitely one of his better, and it turned me on to him. And again, you were responsible for that. So I went with a fairly obvious one. I was literally just thinking about this in a weird way, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Last Boy Scout, does that not start out with a scene where a guy's in a football game and pulls out a gun
Yes.
and shoots it?
Yes. Who
Such a
was it though?
bizarre. I
Was it
don't know
Wesley
if it
Snipes
was.
again?
I think it's well, the other actor in it is Damon Wayans.
So it's Damon
I'm not
Wayans.
sure,
Is
but I'm not
no,
sure that
I
Damon Wayans was the one because that guy obviously didn't survive, the rest of the movie.
yes.
Because, but it might have been Wesley. I'd have to look at it. But so I was thinking about that in a really twisted way. I hadn't thought about that movie in forever. And then after all the horrific stuff that happened down in New Orleans,
Uh,
I was worried about the football games and
mhm.
someone trying to do something. And then you have this mix of violence and football. And that movie came to my mind because it was such a stark opening scene. But I don't remember enough about the movie to really recommend it. So I just pulled a Tom and went with a second choice that I could describe but not recommend. The one I went with was fairly easy for me, which is Silence of the Lambs, which is
Right.
a very important movie. But it's in the line with those Thomas Harris novels, and I recommended one of his earliest books a long time ago in one of our earlier episodes about how spooky it was to be reading his book while living in the town where he was describing some of these terrible things happening. It's a very vivid, scary isn't the right word, but he can write one hell of a scary novel. And Silence of the Lambs, I think, was his best. And the interpretation by Jonathan Demme with Jodie Foster is sort of a not naive, but inexperienced investigator. And oh, what I just blank on his name. I have it right up here.
Anthony Hopkins, I'm sure.
Anthony Hopkins
Yeah, what a
as
scary motherfucker. Holy shit.
just as Dr. Hannibal Lecter. And then in an understated role is Scott Glenn. He was always one of my favorite actors, and he played Jack Crawford, who was the lead, the supervisor, and he ran through all those Thomas Harris novels, as did Hannibal Lecter. So, really important movie, really powerful, really scary, and one that you won't forget certain scenes the rest of your life. So, strongly recommend.
Yeah, I think technically that movie's probably considered a thriller because it's really kind of a murder mystery serial killer thing. But the way Jonathan Demme directed that, it's a horror film, and
Yeah.
I think I've only watched it once all the way through. I've seen parts of it, of course, and there's famous scenes that you see over just because you see them on YouTube. But that is a frightening, frightening film. I don't know that anybody ever did it better. Did
Mhm.
uh, Thomas Harris work better than they did in that movie.
Agreed. All right, so that'll take us to Post Facto.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake.
Post Facto is where we correct anything we got wrong in previous episodes, fill in the blanks of unfinished thoughts, which is my forte, and just try to clean up where we weren't completely accurate in previous episodes. Do you want
Yeah,
to start,
so
Tom?
I will start. Our last episode was the season finale of season 5, and my outstanding special guest was my wife Dawn. We talked a lot about college sports and the NCAA. I talked about an all sports award, and I referred to it as the Lear Cup. First of all, it's not an NCAA official award. It's from, I think, an athletic directors organization, but they give, first of all, it's called the Learfield Directors Cup. And they give one to a school in each division of the NCAA plus the NAIA. And it is what I described it as, which is you get points for how your school finishes in every single sport that they may play in. And the other mistake I made, aside from just the name, which is Learfield Directors Cup, is that I made the comment that WashU had finished, perennially in the top 3. And that's not actually true. I went back and I looked, and they are perennially in the top 10 in Division 3. There was a run where they finished second or third for within a span of 5 or 6 years. They probably did it 3 or 4 times. But they're not always in the top 3, but they are always in the top 10, and they seem to just be getting better and better. But I did misspeak about what I call the Lear Cup, and I just wanted to correct that. Also, a correction that means nothing to anyone other than my wife and I, but I said that we saw the Hawks win the Stanley Cup championship in Game 7. And that year they actually won, they beat the Lightning, but it was Game 6. It just, obviously, it was they won their 4th game. So it felt like Game 7. But after I finished recording, I thought, I don't think it was Game 7. And then finally, my biggest mistake, and I tried to record something, talk about, making the sausage. I tried to record something I could then just edit into the end of the last episode. And that was a thank you to Dawn. I realized at the end of the episode, I didn't thank her specifically for appearing, because not only do I think she turned out to be a really good guest, but she also saved our butts because we needed some content and she was there for me. But I didn't thank her. I tried to edit it. It sounded horrible when I put it into that episode. So I decided just to do it now as part of Post Facto.
Nice work. And I extend my thanks to Dawn too. She pondered if I hated her, and that's why I didn't show up. But it couldn't be further from the truth. I'll be real quick. One, I just appreciate Tom sharing my recommendations from that last episode. The one that I was most looking forward to discussing was, of course, the Uncle Tupelo debut album, No Depression, which I found by complete accident over at Street Side Records. Just grabbed it because it looked cool and changed my listening habits pretty much for the rest. Changed music, but also my listening habits as much as any album out there. So.
Which brings us to staff picks.
Brand new, just around the corner from you.
Every episode, we try to pick something that is either brand new or coming out soon that we're excited about. And we both have something to talk about today. Chris, you want to go?
I will go. So this band is a little more popular than I usually recommend, but they have some of my favorite songs. The band's name is Flatland Cavalry. They're out of Lubbock, Texas. I know I've put some of their stuff on some of our playlists. They do a fantastic, it's not a duet because it's a band singing with another person. So it's a bandette. I don't know. Bando.
What was duo? What did we do? Quartet. Quartet. Are they a quartet? That'll
With
be news to them.
With Caitlin Butts, who's becoming one of my favorites. I recommended one of her albums on staff picks. But Flatland Cavalry has put out 2 albums. One is simply called Flatland Forever, and the other one is called Flatland Forever More, in parentheses. And between the two, they have 65 tracks. So it's a compilation of their first 10 years. There's commentary on there about various songs. There's alternate takes like acoustic. There's demo versions and all that other stuff, as well as the full versions of all their great stuff. So it's just to sort of commemorate their 10 years together as a band. They have like somewhere like 75,000 followers on YouTube Music, which is way more than a lot of the stuff, but they are well worth it. It's a bluegrassy country, really strong vocals. If you like that sort of stuff, which I do. And this is a really good way to start out with this band, because you can get sort of everything all together and then go from there. And I think they're going to become bigger and better over the next couple of years.
Cool. My staff pick is an album that is coming out January 24. So we got a couple of weeks still from the recording of this episode, but the band has released a few songs, as bands do these days. It's called Lucero Unplugged, which is not a very unusual or not a very unique title for an album, but it is Lucero, the band Lucero, which I am, as regular listeners know, a huge fan of. It's 20 tracks, and what they've decided to do, what Ben Nichols in particular has decided to do, because I think it's just Ben Nichols and maybe their piano player, keyboard player, but they're doing acoustic versions of their songs. So it's very similar to something I recommended towards the end of last season, which was Todd Snyder's Purple Building albums, where he was re-recording each album, but doing it solo acoustic and telling stories. I don't know that there's a lot of storytelling in Lucero Unplugged, but I've listened to the first couple songs, which are, again, just re-recordings of great Lucero tunes, and it's going to be awesome. It's going to be a great album, and he's got a great voice for doing solo acoustic work, even though he also has a great voice for screaming out kind of rock and roll songs. So I'm really looking forward to it. As I said, there a couple of songs have already come out, and they're really good, and I recommend on January 24th downloading the whole album.
I will definitely check that one out. He has some really cool sort of in-store appearances where he's just singing with his guitar, and he pulls it off as well as anyone. He's great.
Yeah, he's got such a cool, just raspy voice that he always sounds awesome.
All right, and that brings us to what started all this stuff, which is Tom and I's penchant for making playlists. So for each season, we will have a playlist, and each of us will choose 2 songs. If we have guests, we will often include one of their songs or more. And then we also have some special playlists where we put together usually like a 10-track playlist from our guests. But these two songs will go on the season 6 playlist for Third Song In. Those will be available on YouTube Music, Apple Music, Spotify, and Amazon Music. And we try to line these up with the theme of the episode. How did you do with that, Tom?
I went as literal as I possibly could. I picked a song from my favorite Tom Waits album from 1975, Nighthawks at the Diner. There's a song called Eggs and Sausage in a Cadillac with Susan Mickelson. Tom Waits is, I think he's a fantastic artist. Haven't really talked about him much in this podcast, but I tend to listen to a little bit of Tom Waits every month just because I love his style. I don't know how else to put it. This album, Nighthawks at the Diner, is my favorite of his. And I was reading about it a little bit. It was recorded in 4 different sessions in front of a small audience. So it was a studio recording, but it was set up to recreate the atmosphere of a jazz club. And that is exactly what it sounds like if you listen to that album all the way through. But as I was trying to decide what song to pick for the playlist for an episode called Making the Sausage, I thought this is the perfect song for listening. First of all, listening to if you're hungover on New Year's Day, which is when I was coming up with it in the first place. And, it's about eggs. So it goes perfectly with the sausage.
I like your literalism.
Yeah.
I did not go as literal. I went a little bit more with the creative process. The song that I chose is from Dan Auerbach, who is, I think, the lead guitarist, singer for the Black Keys. And he put out a solo album in 2017 called Waiting on a Song. It has one of my all-time favorite songs, which I can't believe I'm now going to blank on. I have it stuck in my head. I just got to get to the refrain. Shine on Me, which is as catchy and bouncy of a song as you'll ever hear. Andy, check that one out. You won't ever accuse me of being too slow in my beat choice. But this is the title track called Waiting on a Song. It's all about just wandering around, waiting for that song to come to him. It's the sort of the passive creative process when he doesn't quite have something in mind and just waiting for those ideas to come to him. And it's a clever, funny song. And as I'm sitting here thinking about what I'm going to write for my blog this week, because it's my turn, I'm inspired by this because I have nothing right now.
Nice.
Waiting on my blog would be my retitle of this.
There you go. So as Chris said, both these songs will be our first and second songs on the season 6 playlist. You can find it wherever you stream your music, Third Song In season 6, and we will build on it as we go through our season of podcast episodes. Before we close, since this was an episode trying to discuss how we put together episodes, I will point out that we were talking yesterday on the phone, and we both agreed we needed to work on some visual cues and hand signals so that we could kind of communicate while we're still talking doing this recording. And we haven't got a single hand signal that's worth a shit. It just all comes down to flipping each other off, and that doesn't seem to be helpful at all.
Yeah, we stepped on each other as much on this episode as any we've ever done.
Yeah. And to be fair, we took a little break, so we have to get back used to it. But you're absolutely right. I feel like I've been talking over you way too much.
So this stepping on each other and everything else has been recorded in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Joliet, Illinois.
You can reach us, and we urge you to do so at thirdsongin@gmail.com. Please email us with your questions, your comments, any feedback on this episode or any episode we put out in the past. We'd love to hear your recommendations, whether they be pop culture recommendations or recommendations to improve the podcast. I'd also ask you to follow us. Please rate and review this podcast on any platform you listen to it. Give us all your stars. Download the podcast. That apparently helps us, and we need all the help we can get. As we said before, you can find the podcast as well as our playlists on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music, as well as on our website.
And or our website. You can go to thirdsonginpodcast.com. All the stuff we talked about on this episode will be on there. There's a From Our Shows link where you can see all the staff picks, recommendations, unknown unknowns, and as mentioned, where we include material about our guests. And we would especially encourage you to check that site out, that page out. Starting with season 6, we've sort of refreshed the look of the website with some new colors. Unfortunately, they're not the colors that I want. But it is a new look with our black and yellow, which is unfortunately paying homage to the Steelers for another season, at least another year, because
Yeah, get to go till
football
next
season
fall.
runs a lot longer. Yeah. And I think the newly designed logo looks really sharp. So proud of that. Check it out at thirdsonginpodcast.com.
We also have a Facebook page where you can communicate with us. We try to post links, pictures, short video, etc. That's a good place to get information about current episodes and upcoming episodes. And again, a great way to let us know what you think.
And you've been listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thanks for listening. So ever wonder there we go. That's perfect.
That's perfect. Cold open, done. Next. Next segment.
Let's see. No traffic yet today on the website, at least.
No, well, it's early and we suck. Fuck Google.